Hello, and welcome back to the fifth and final part of this five-part series on data binding. In part 4, we talked about binding a list of data to the UI, and now in part 5, instead of binding to a list of static data, we're going to bind to dynamic data that we pull down from the Rotten Tomatoes API. If you're not familiar with Rotten Tomatoes, they basically have all sorts of information about movies, and they kind of focus on reviews about movies. So it's kind of a go-to source to see what people think about different movies. So what I've got on the screen here is the developer website for the Rotten Tomatoes API. You do have to sign up as a developer for Rotten Tomatoes, but it's free. And after you do sign up, you'll get an application key to use. And you will need that application key to make the calls to the API, or else you'll get rejected. So if you make it to this developer page and sign up and get your API key, you can come down and click on the documentation, and it will tell you more about all of the different requests you can make and the kind of information that you'll get back, which is going to be a JSON string. It gives you some examples of different calls you can make. One of the really cool things I like here is the IO docs, which does the same thing but in a more visual way. So it's got my application key saved here, and if I scroll down, these are all the different calls I can make. So let's take the box office, for example, and expand that, and this limit value is how many movies I want to get back, so I can change it to 20 or something like that. And then if I click try it and give it a couple seconds, it will show me what the request URI is that I made. So if you wanted to get 20 movies from the box office with your application key, this is what URI you would use. And then it's got headers, response, and then if I scroll all the way down, it actually shows me the body of what I get back. So this is the actual JSON response that I'm going to get back and have to convert to some kind of object in C#. Now, another cool thing that you can do with this is you can go over to a website called JSON to C#, and you can enter in, let me go back and copy that URL that I had. So this is my URI that I have for, again, getting 20 movies back from the box office. And if I copy that in and click generate, JSON to C# will actually generate the C# classes that I would need based on this object. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I see that the root object has a list of movie objects, and then it has some different links. So I'm going to let this sit for a second and move back over to our Visual Studio project. And now I need to add a Rotten Tomatoes class to our shared folder, so where we're going to define the object that we will convert that JSON response to. And I'll call it Rotten Tomatoes, if I can spell it correctly. Add that. And then if I go back and copy all of this, I can just press copy there. And then go back to Visual Studio. I can copy all of that inside of our Rotten Tomatoes. Oops, I didn't copy that correctly. So copy and paste. There we go. Now we've got all of this copied in here. I need to change a few things. The first is the name of the Rotten Tomatoes movie object or class. I'm going to change it to RT movie because we already have the movie class that we defined ourselves. And then down here, this is going to be RT movie as well. And then the second thing I'm going to do is all the stuff inside of this root object class. I'm going to get rid of that class completely and just copy that code as fields of our Rotten Tomatoes class. So they're the same thing, just now it's in the Rotten Tomatoes class, and within that class there's all these different classes. So this is basically our object model for what we're going to get back as we make a call to the Rotten Tomatoes API. So now let's go back over to our movie's data source. And again, instead of using this static data, we want to make that call to get the data from the Rotten Tomatoes API. So first, I'll come up here and I'll copy and paste our string. and call it API call. And I need to actually go back and get that from up here again. So copy, and then we'll say API call equals inside the quotes. We're going to copy that string. Alright, so that way we can reference it later on. And the first thing we want to do inside of our load data is create an HTTP client. Call it WC equals new HTTP, and actually that should be client. And I'll resolve that. And this HTTP client is what's going to go out and get the response back from our call. So I'll say string response equals, and we're going to do WC dot get string async and pass it in our API call as the parameter. And if you notice, I've got some red here. This get string async is an asynchronous call. And if you're not familiar with asynchronous programming in Windows 8 or Windows Phone, I would suggest going to take a look at it. But we need to await that response since it's asynchronous, and then because we use an await in this method, we want to make sure it's an asynchronous method as well. So now no more red, which is what we're looking for. And I've got a link to the asynchronous programming in the blog post if you want to take a look at that. The next thing we need to do is add a reference to the json.net Nuget package, and that's going to help us to deserialize this response, this JSON response, into an instance of that Rotten Tomatoes object that we just created. So if I go to my solution and right click and say manage Nuget packages, and it's usually one of the first ones to pop up, but I'll go ahead and search for it. Give it a second to load in the results. And there it is at the top. So I'm going to install that. And this will actually add the reference to both, what I was about to say, both the Windows and the Windows Phone projects. And in the Universal project, you have to add the reference in both the Windows and Windows Phone projects if you reference the Nuget package in the shared folder. That's just kind of the way we have to set it up. And we're almost done here. Give it a few more seconds. Alright, so I think we've got that. Let's just double check. Under references, we've got the newtonsoft.json, and then the same thing in the Windows Phone project as well. Perfect. So now that we have that, we can basically use one line to leverage json.net and convert this string response to an instance of our Rotten Tomatoes object. So I've got that written. Let me paste it in there. What this is saying is, I need to resolve this. JSON convert. Oh, sorry. We want to deserialize our string response into an instance of the Rotten Tomatoes object. Remember that class we just created. And this is just saying we're going to cast it to a Rotten Tomatoes object. So now that we have this RT, the Rotten Tomatoes object, we want to convert the data within that to an observable collection of movies. So we basically want to create a movie object that we define very early on from each one of the movies within the RT object. It gets a little tricky with all the different movie objects, but what we're going to do a for each to iterate through Rotten Tomatoes RT. So iterate through the RT movies, and remember RT, let's go back over here for a second. RT movies is, or RT movie is what's the actual movie within the RT object. We had to rename it because we already have a movie object defined, right? So we're going to iterate through each of those, each RT movie, and we'll call it M in the RT movies. So the list of movies within this instance of the Rotten Tomatoes object that we've created. So this M, again, is going to be an RT movie. And we want to copy the information from that RT movie into a temporary movie object and add that to our observable collection, because we have an observable collection of movie objects up here. So I'm going to create a temporary movie. So new movie. There we go. And then I'll set its title to m.title. Oh, sorry. To m.title. The temp rating will be m.rating, and then the temp.year will be m.year, and they store it as an integer, so I'm just going to do the call it toString method because our year is a string. And then I will add that temp movie object to our observable collection. M.rating. Oh, excuse me, they don't call it rating, they call it MPA A_rating. There we go. So again, this is adding, just like we did before, adding a movie object to our observable collection. Before we were just using static data, now we're actually using dynamic data. And then back in our main page.xaml.cs, we still should have the same thing. So we're still loading a movie's data source and then setting the item source to that instance. And this is kind of displays the power of data binding because we have the same code here and the same code in our main page.xaml, but our data source is changing. So they're two separate things. They don't affect each other right away. So let's run this in Windows 8. Let's kind of take a look at what we get back. And we should see a list of movie data. There we go. So these are the top 20 movies in the box office right now. Again, this information is powered by the Rotten Tomatoes API. Right now there's 22 Jump Street, How to Train Your Dragon, Maleficent, Edge of Tomorrow, all those. And going back to the universal app idea, I'm going to run this one more time with the same exact code. Again, run it in Windows Phone. And let's give the emulator a few seconds to pop up. And hopefully we'll see the same thing. But again, the way that we changed our data source without changing the UI and the binding statements is the real power of this binding that we've been talking about. So let's see what information we get to pop up here. There we go. So this this main page doesn't fit perfectly on the phone, but we see the same data, which is what we're really focused on here. Perfect. So that concludes this 5-part series on data binding. If you have any questions, please comment below. Let me know if there's anything else I can do or how to help. And with that, I'll say goodbye.